Hitting a plateau in your first year of training is completely different to hitting a plateau in your fourth year of training. And obviously there's going to be different solutions depending on your experience. What I be seeing a lot is intermediate trainees doing things to break through plateaus that they don't need to be doing, okay? Like, you're not C-bum to be optimizing the tiniest little bit in your nutrition and training. So we're going to put everything into context today. What should you be focusing on based on your level of experience in the gym? Now, if you haven't already, go watch part 1, because there are going to be words and concepts that I refer to throughout this video that you may not know about. Things like proximity to failure, progressive overload, all of that jazz. So go watch it and come back. And if you've already watched it, then welcome. Let's get straight into it. So I'm going to break this down into 3 different tiers, or what I would call the competency hierarchy. The base of the pyramid is where everybody begins. This is the bread and butter of hypertrophy. If you don't know this stuff, no wonder you're hitting plateaus. Focus on the base first. Then, as you build up competency and you become more of an intermediate kind of lifter where you've got some skin in the game, we can move up the pyramid and focus on some more specific areas to push past any plateaus that you may be experiencing. Then at the highest level of the pyramid, we'll find most late intermediate and advanced trainees where plateaus become more common and frequent. So the way to push past them becomes a little bit more specific. Starting off at the base of the pyramid, okay? These are foundations. And if you are a beginner or your skill set in the gym is very low, this is where you start, okay? So if you fall under the base of the competency pyramid, then there are 3 main training focuses that I would recommend for you to push through any plateaus you've experienced. Number 1, choose quality movements. Ditch all of the fancy, complex exercises that you've seen online and get rid of the booty band. Stop doing a lunge into a curl. Just focus on the basics. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. These movements have worked for generations of all of the people that you look up to. Just do what they do, okay? And learn how to do them well. Combination of free weighted exercises and machine work. Just learn how to move. Learn how to really connect with the muscle, okay? And improve your technique. Number 2, really focus on adding weight as frequently as you can without ego lifting, okay? Take advantage of the fact that you have a very steep learning and growth curve as a beginner, okay? Or as somebody who has just first started learning how to train effectively, all right? As you get more advanced, as you get more skin in the game, those progressions are gonna be harder and harder to achieve, okay? Take advantage of this growth curve and try to get more weight every week. It's pretty easy to achieve if you really put your mind to it. And lastly, number 3 is stop counting reps. I really don't think you should be worrying about how many reps you get, but rather focus on how many slow reps that you get, okay? I suggest filming yourself, not only so you can learn what you're doing wrong technique-wise and how to fix it, but also so you can assess your intensity of effort and really see how slow your reps are. Because you may think that they're slowing down, but when you watch them, rep number 1 is the same speed as rep 12, okay? Those are your training focuses. And just a little note on volume and number of reps. I personally give my beginner trainees more volume and more reps than my intermediates. And the reason why is because they need more practice. You get more opportunities to nail your technique when you have more sets and more reps to do. And likewise, the chances are you're not gonna push your sets close to failure for a while, okay? And that's why you're better off doing more sets so you can still get gains even if you're not pushing the sets that you have close to failure. Now, moving into nutrition and lifestyle priorities, top 3 focuses for you. Number 1, protein, okay? I would recommend at least 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So if you are a 70 kilogram female, at least 140 grams of protein a day. Build up to it, starting at 100 grams and working your way up, but this is what you should be focusing on. Then I would also recommend eating either at maintenance or in a slight deficit. I don't think that you need to go into a crazy deficit, nor do I think you need to go into a crazy surplus. Why? Because you have the best chance of body recomposition at this time, which basically means that you can drop fat and gain muscle at the same time, which is very rare. But again, if you are a beginner, you have this opportunity, so take advantage of it. Once you stop recomping at whatever calories you're on, then you can make the executive decision whether you want to go into a committed deficit or a committed building phase. And then lastly, I would recommend track. Get a nutritional literacy under your belt. Really educate yourself. I know not a lot of people like to track, but if you treat it as a crash course, treat it as an experiment and not something you have to do, but something that you can do electively to push you further to your goals as a short-term sacrifice for long-term education and informed decisions, why wouldn't you take that? You know, how are you supposed to know how to hit 140 grams of protein if you don't know that you can't get 100 grams of protein from 100 grams of chicken breast? They're actually two different things. Educate yourself. You don't have to do it forever, but if you want to be someone who can eat on the fly or eat mindfully or intuitively, then you need to build a better intuition first, and that's going to come from educating yourself. So this is the base. Now, you might think that you're not a beginner. You might think that, oh, I've got a couple of years of experience. I am not in this category. But if you're not doing any of the things that I just mentioned, you need to start here. I want to emphasize that the base of the pyramid isn't just for beginners. This is where most beginners will find themselves, but it's more so a skill set that you need to have. It is the hierarchy of competence, okay? Make sure you're competent in these things and then we can move up. So let's do that now. The middle of the pyramid is where we need to double down and individualize. So everything that we were doing at the beginning, at the base of the pyramid, we're gonna keep doing, okay? And we're going to nail it. We're gonna really nail the basics, but we're gonna get a little bit more specific with our training and nutrition, just to make it a little bit more individual to us and our needs, especially because you're gonna be in this phase for a very long time. Okay, the foundations don't take too long to nail. I would estimate, you know, for a fresh trainee, 6 months to really grasp the concepts. But once you scale up this pyramid, you're probably going to be here for years, okay? That learning and growth curve really starts to flatten when you're at this point, which means that you have to double down and really apply everything that you've learned at the foundation level to continue to get returns. So the 4 training focuses to push through any plateaus you experience at this stage. Number 1, you're gonna find that it's harder to add weight as frequently as you used to, which is very normal, in which case the double progression method is gonna be your best friend. This is how the double progression method works. First, you add weight to do the minimum number of reps. So for example, if you have a set with an 8 to 12 rep range, you're gonna select a weight you can do at least 8 reps with, okay? You're gonna start there and you're gonna work your way up till you can do 12 reps for all of your sets, okay? Once you've maxed that out, then you can go ahead and add another weight, starting at the lower end of the rep range and then working your way up to the higher end of the rep range. So there's 2 progressions here, the progression in weight and the progression in reps. This helps you feel like you're still progressing even when you're stuck on the same weight for many weeks, okay? Like you might be stuck on 30 kilos for weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4, but you're getting 8, 8, 8 reps, then 8, 9, 10 reps, then 9, 9, 10 reps, and then 10, 10, and 10 reps, okay? So you kind of get the gist of it. You're still progressing, even though your weights haven't changed. You're still lifting more load when you multiply the weight by the reps. The second training focus, don't worry about adding more sets. In fact, I could argue dropping back the number of sets that you're doing compared to a beginner. Why? Because now you know how to make every set count. You know what a hard set feels like. So one could argue that you can get away with doing less sets, but still have productive outcomes. If you know how to push every single set close to failure, strip back the volume, because if you have too much work to do and there's excessive fatigue, that's gonna lead to a point where you can't push your sets as hard because your nervous system and connective tissues just haven't had enough time to recover. So don't feel like you are regressing just because you're dropping back the volume. This is where individuality really comes in. Really learn how to read your body and figure out, are you actually recovering from the amount of volume that you're doing? If you're not, drop back the sets and just focus on making every set count. Likewise, I would recommend pushing a little bit closer to failure. You know, instead of going to a 4 or a 5 rep in reserve, go to a 2 to 3. Number 3, this may be a controversial take, but don't worry too much about form, especially on those last few hard reps. I think at this point, you know, you've been in the gym for a while, you would classify yourself as a good quality lifter, and that can almost become egotistical because you don't want to make any rep bad, okay? You want to be known as a good lifter. And what inevitably ends up happening is you cheat yourself of hard reps because you feel like you can't perform them well, okay? And that can cheat you of progress, and I'll tell you why. Those last few reps count, as we've already discussed. Don't expect them to be perfect. If you're fatigued, if you're putting in effort and your muscles are, you know, failing on you, don't expect everything to be, you know, smooth like butter and well coordinated. There's going to be a little bit of sloppiness, you know, provided that you're not ego lifting and, you know, your form isn't terrible. It's okay if there's a little bit of rounding of your upper back with a deadlift. It's okay if you're shaking on a squat or a lunge. It's not the end of the world if your hips shoot up on the last rep of the squat. Like, don't get too pressed about it. And remember, perfectionism is not your friend here, okay? You want to lift well and you want to lift close to perfect, but you don't have to strive for perfection at the expense of pushing your sets close to failure. And the last training tip, again, controversial and a sad reality that I was in denial about for the longest time, but I have to say it, okay, because it applies to a lot of people, myself included. Cut back on the barbell work. It is not doing you as much good as you think, okay? As great as hitting PBs on your squat bench dead feels, you will not get as jacked as you think you are belting out the barbell and the dumbbell work compared with machines. Machines are your best friend. They have helped people get massive for ages, and there's a reason. Think about it. You can't push close to failure on barbell work compared to isolation work, right? It requires a lot more effort and a lot more energy for you to perform a squat well compared to a leg extension, right? You don't have to brace in a leg extension. You have external stability. You can really isolate the quads without any other muscles working or very little other muscles working. And because of that, you're getting a very high stimulus on the muscle, putting a lot of tension on it, without the drawbacks of fatigue. You could push a set of leg extensions to failure, feel absolutely smoked, but not have the systemic fatigue that a set of squats not taken to failure provides. What I mean by that is you're not getting as much of a stimulus on the quads, but you're getting more fatigue with a squat. Treat your isolation work the way you would treat a core lift, because your isolation work has a higher stimulus and a lower fatigue ratio, okay? This concept, STF ratio, stimulus to fatigue ratio, is something that you should really focus on. I'm not saying that you have to throw away the barbell. All I'm saying is I would highly recommend you gear most of the training volume throughout the week towards exercises with a high STF ratio. So things that will provide you with external stability, exercises where you don't have to brace, exercises where you really feel the burn where you're meant to, and you can really push hard without all of the drawbacks of fatigue, okay? You can still find space in your program for exercises with a low STF ratio because you really enjoy them, or you're a powerlifter, or you get some stimulus, okay? Like, for example, an RDL, perfect example, very high stimulus on the glutes, but also very high fatigue. That's an exercise worth having, right? But that's really up to you and your goals and preferences. And you can also alter certain exercises to make them higher on the STF scale. So for example, a Bulgarian split squat, pretty damn stimulative on the glutes and quads, but also pretty damn fatiguing. What you can do is hold onto a pole for a bit more stability so you don't have to worry about bracing, or you don't stop the set too soon because you've lost balance, and therefore you can really focus on pushing that set as close to failure as possible. Likewise, doing a chest supported row instead of a bent over dumbbell or barbell row. This again has less axial loading, so your spine and lower back have a lot less pressure on them. You don't have to worry about bracing. You can push the same if not heavier weights, and you're getting a great stimulus out of it as well. So those are your top 4 training focuses. Nutrition focuses. Number 1, don't expect to recomp anymore. The chances that you're going to lose fat and build muscle at the same time are unlikely, and this is where a dedicated deficit or surplus really needs to happen. You need to make that choice whether you want to strip the fat first and then move into a long and slow building phase, and if you don't need to lose the fat, just go straight into a building phase. Now this leads me to the next point. You're gonna have to do a bulk at one point in time, okay? If you want to grow muscle. And this is where a lot of people plateau, even when they're training and doing all the right things. If you're not eating enough, you know what's gonna happen, okay? But the most important thing is don't get too fat too quick, all right? You don't want to bulk too fast and then end up feeling too fat and then having to do a mini cut so that you can lose the fat that you gain too quickly. The reason why is because a mini cut is not just the 6 or 8 weeks that you think it is. All right, what's gonna happen is you're gonna have 6 weeks in the mini cut, then it's gonna take you about, 3 to 4 weeks to reverse diet back to maintenance, then another 2 to 3 weeks for you to get back into a surplus, and then maybe another week or 2 for you to start feeling the effects of the surplus on your training. So before you know it, you've lost 10 to 12 weeks per mini cut. And that's why you really want to minimize the number of mini cuts that you do throughout the year. So slow and steady wins the race, okay? More food does not necessarily always mean more gains. So commit to at least a 6-month bulk, okay? Try not to interrupt it, and try not to get fat too quick. Now, how do you do this? Again, it's very individual, and it really depends like how many calories you're gonna need. I have some clients that gain weight pretty quickly and other clients that are hard gainers. The general rule of thumb is aim to gain anywhere between 1 to 2% of your body weight per month. So if you are a 70 kilogram female, that's 700 grams a month, you know, maximum 1.4 kilos a month. That's not very much, okay? So add calories so that you can get into this stride and consistently gain that weight. If you are gaining a little bit too much, then pull back on calories. I think it's also important to note that, you know, that percentage is going to change as you continue to gain weight. So if you're 70 kilos now, in 5 months you might be 75 kilos. The amount you expect to gain will continue to increase. And likewise, we have to consider water weight. The more carbs you eat, the more water you're going to hold. So that's something to consider when you are working out your calculation. The third point on nutrition is figure out a long-term nutritional approach that works for you, where you don't need to rely on MyFitnessPal forever, okay? This is usually where a lot of people get sick of tracking or don't know how to manage nutrition without tracking. And this is where a mindful eating approach is actually helpful. This is where you have a general understanding of how to hit your targets. Can you do that without tracking? Can you do that without weighing every single thing on your plate? You're gonna have skills that you can transfer into an ad hoc approach. And likewise, you want to choose foods that agree with you. Just because your calories continue to increase doesn't mean you should go and eat exorbitant amounts of bread. Maybe you would do better eating more sweet potato and rice and less pasta. Again, you're in this bulk for a long time, right? At least 6 months. And yes, digestion is not gonna be at its peak, okay? Because you're eating more food than you need. You're eating hundreds, if not thousands more. So there is gonna be a bit of digestive discomfort, but we don't need to make it worse than it needs to be, right? So choose foods that agree with you. Find the sweet spot of how much of a certain food you can or can't tolerate, and optimize it as best you can. Likewise, I have a lot of clients who can't handle more than 350 grams of carbs. And what happens if you're somebody who is a hard gainer or needs to eat a lot of calories in order to hit your weight targets every month? Well, maybe increasing fats might be a smarter choice, even though it's not the most optimal and scientifically backed approach. If eating more carbs is making you puffy and bloated and you can't even perform well in the gym because you feel crap all the time and slow and lethargic, then just go and eat some more salmon, you know, no issues with that. So I think this phase of nutrition should really be geared towards finding what makes you feel best and optimize your performance, okay? Whilst also accepting that there is gonna be some discomfort in gaining a bit of fat and eating a bit more than you might be used to. Ultimately, it needs to be something that you can tolerate for the long term and leads to overall better outcomes. And just one point on lifestyle focus, fatigue management is going to come in very handy here. As you are pushing your training harder, you are really trying to push through a plateau, you're probably going to be working harder. And this is where you will need to manage your fatigue so you can consistently show up to the gym and put in the work required to grow. So ensuring your sleep is on check. I wouldn't be surprised if you need 9 or 10 hours of sleep instead of 8, okay? It takes a lot of energy to replenish and recuperate from the training that you've been hammering on your body. You know, laying down and repairing muscle tissue takes time and energy and sleep. So make sure you're getting enough of that. Adding in either scheduled or reactive deloads in your training, so purposely pulling back on your training intensity, maybe doing less volume for a week. That's what we call a deload. You could either plan it ahead of time or just take it when you need it, okay? Really focusing on peri-workout nutrition or nutrition in and around your workout. So having a pre-workout snack or maybe bringing some juice so you can sip on it during a session so you don't fatigue as fast. Having most of your carbs before and after you train. Those are going to become a little bit more important than they used to be to continue to optimize your performance and support you as you try to train as hard as possible to get as big as possible. As I mentioned, considering the stimulus to fatigue ratio, that's going to come in handy. Spreading out your more fatiguing exercises so you've got more time to recover in between, and just minimizing the number of extremely fatiguing and low stimulus exercises if growth is your primary goal. And lastly, top of the pyramid is to optimize, okay? Look, I'm not an advanced trainee yet, but I think I have a pretty advanced competency in order to get there, okay? So we're not reinventing the wheel here. Everything that we've been doing from the very beginning at the base of the pyramid, we continue to do and nail. But as we get higher and higher up the hierarchy, the more specific we get and the more attention to detail that we pay, because those 1%ers matter so much more. And this is because the growth curve really flattens out, okay? When you are an advanced trainee or you have done everything that we've spoken about since the base of the pyramid for many, many years, you almost experience diminishing returns where you're putting in 10 times more effort for the tiniest progress, which is the complete opposite situation when you are a beginner, where you put in the tiniest bit of effort for a lot of results, okay? And so that's where there's less room for error, more scrutiny to detail, and you really have to love the game for you to continue, because plateaus are going to be very frequent and a lot harder to overcome. And that's why, you know, it's not just about making gains, but it's about really enjoying the process of lifting and hitting PBs and nailing nutrition and sleep and fatigue management and all of that, okay? Because the closer you get to your genetic potential, the harder things become. And that's where a lot of people burn out and kind of lose their love for the sport. So it's really important that you're in this for more reasons than just seeing physical progress, but really making it a lifestyle. And honestly, if you've made it to this point and you do classify as being at the top of the pyramid, you probably already have made it a part of your identity, and you're not just in it for the gains, the physical gains, that is. So without further ado, let's get into the top training focuses. Firstly, you're gonna have to push a lot closer to failure. In fact, I would argue going to failure a lot more frequently than you used to. So the 0 to 1 rep in reserve is probably the sweet spot. And likewise, more volume. This is a last resort, but you are at the last resort. You know, if you have adapted to intense training, a lot of work, and you're gonna have to continue pushing that work somehow, you know, and most of the time in this phase in your training journey, it's gonna come from more volume. And this is really where you're gonna have to increase your training frequency, you know, training 5 or 6 days a week instead of 3 or 4, because there's only so much volume you can fit in a session, right? And lastly, training periodization and specialization will be a little bit more important here. So training periodization periodization is really just like how you structure or plan the year in mesocycles or blocks, right? So this is where you would factor in for things like deloads, when you're going to be really pushing closer and closer to failure. Maybe you're planning to step on stage and compete, and so this is where planning really comes in handy. And then specialization is really just focusing on lagging muscle groups or specializing in a specific muscle. So for example, you might want to bring up your rear delts a little bit more, so you allocate more volume to the rear delts and less to the front delts. Or maybe you want to focus more on the lower striations or lower pec muscles instead of the upper pectoral muscles. So you can get very specific there. When you're an intermediate or more so lower on the competency hierarchy, I don't think that stuff matters as much. You know, you don't need to schedule as many deloads. You don't need to worry as much about fatigue management. You just want to grow everything rather than focusing in on a very specific, you know, fiber orientation and how to build that part up. So it becomes a little bit more significant the more advanced you get. And then another training focus is just time. It's just gonna take more time because you're getting more diminishing returns. You're gonna have to really commit longer to see any bit of progress. Top 3 nutrition/lifestyle focuses. There's just less room for error. So you gotta really be dedicated. That means, you know, saying no to alcohol and late nights because you want to preserve muscle mass and you want to protect your sleep, and you can't afford to miss sessions because you've got 6 training days a week. That's a lot of training days. You can't afford to miss one, right? Otherwise you're missing out on volume that you could be doing. And alongside that, it's really about optimizing your health, okay? In order to perform at your best, to really push your body beyond its limits and do things that the human body is rarely capable of, you really need to ensure that your biomarkers are on point, your sleep is on point, your gut health is doing well, you know? You have to sacrifice a lot of what modern society considers to be fun because it has detrimental effects on your health, which therefore impacts your performance in the gym. And not a lot of people are willing to sacrifice this much in order to continue making progress and pushing through plateaus, which is completely understandable, I get it. But that's the cost of continual gains when you're at that level of competency and experience. Next up, peri-workout nutrition and micronutrient status and your supplementation all become a lot more important here as well. So if before you could get away with not having a pre-workout meal, you probably do need a pre-workout meal. If before you could get away with just a basic multivitamin, now you probably need something a little bit more specific or a little bit more magnesium than you needed before. If you didn't really have issues with your tendons and joints because you weren't lifting that heavy, but now you're lifting a lot of freaking weight and you need that extra support, probably need to start taking more collagen and glucosamine and MSM. So as your physique enhances, you're gonna need more support. Gut health. This is a big one. When you're going through multiple phases of cutting and bulking for years and years and years, that can really mess up your gut health, if not your metabolism as well. So really paying attention to food quality and finding ways to optimize your gut health as much as possible. For example, we know that sweet potato is a lot friendlier on the gut than, say, pasta, right? But the thing is, sweet potato is very satiating, and so you're gonna have to eat a lot of it in order for you to hit your carb requirements, and you're gonna have to force feeding a lot because it's such a, you know, dense, a volume dense food compared to pasta. It's a lot easier to scoff down those calories without feeling as full. So there's a trade-off there, is do you hit your macros but suffer poor gut health? Or do you optimize your gut health but end up sacrificing calories because you just can't eat all of them because Paleolithic whole foods fill you up faster? So that's something to consider. And lastly, recovery becomes very, very important. You know, your salt and glucose status at all times of the day, you know, taking magnesium salt baths and ensuring that you've got enough minerals to help replenish all of the systems that you are constantly hammering. Frequent physio, chiro, osteo appointments, all of a sudden your lifestyle starts getting pretty expensive. But you know, it's funny, all of these like advanced techniques to push through plateaus are often the first points of call that people go for when they're not even doing things at the base of the pyramid. They're focusing on adding more sets and, you know, optimizing their nutrient status and going and seeing the physio and the chiro when it's like, maybe you should just focus on sleeping more. Maybe you should focus on making do with the sets you have and making them hard. You know, maybe you just need to eat more. Don't worry about, you know, the exact partitioning of the nutrients and all of this fancy stuff. It doesn't need to be complicated, you know, unless you are at the top of the pyramid. But if you're not, I mean, good, because you don't need to work as hard to push through the plateau. So I hope that this video was helpful. I hope that you not only have an understanding of why you're hitting a plateau, but also how to overcome it given your competency level. Now, if you haven't already figured by now, bodybuilding is a grind. It is a very demanding grind that takes years of effort and money and time and dedication. And even after all that, you will still experience plateaus. And that's why a lot of lifters burn out. You know, there's only so many plateaus one can take before you might lose your love for the sport. And that's just a reality a lot of people have to expect. And it happened to me. You know, I never thought I would say it, but I actually started to hate the gym. You know, you can experience physical and mental burnout from constantly striving for more. And this is where, you know, keeping your ego in check and expectations in check as well is really important. Now, don't worry, I fell back in love with the gym again and we're continuing to grind. But if this is something that resonates with you, where, you know, you may have experienced a plateau, but you also may have experienced a burnout, then you should definitely stay tuned for the next video where I talk about my experience about bodybuilding and the harsh truths that nobody really talks about, but also how to bounce back and fall back in love with the gym. So stay tuned for that. And just before you go ahead and watch that video, of course, I have to plug the Snatched Fitness Training and Nutrition ebook, okay? This is a completely free PDF where I go through all things cutting, bulking, building your metabolism, how to train effectively. Like all the concepts that we covered in this video are in written form if you want to consolidate them, and essentially like how an elite coach trains their clients through body composition goals. Yo, the elite of our industry charge high ticket prices for this information, but I don't gatekeep over here, so you best believe you go and get it. Link is in the description box down below for you to snag a copy. So hope you enjoy that and stay tuned for the next video. Ciao.